It's all my fault. I just should have known. If I had just done X, it wouldn't have happened. These are common refrains when somebody is trying to make sense of a traumatic event. And this video will explain why we do this, why it's more harmful than helpful, and what to do instead. Hey there, Jessica here. I'm a therapist in Austin who specializes in PTSD, as well as sleep, chronic pain, OCD, and maladaptive overcontrol. I make educational content about all my different specialties. And be sure to stick around till the end because I'll be sharing some of the same pointers that I share in therapy to help people better understand their role in the traumatic event. So what we're really talking about today is hindsight bias. So I'm going to define hindsight bias. It is the tendency to believe after an event that you knew it would happen all along and or that you could have predicted it or something along those lines. Hindsight bias was actually first identified in the 1970s by researchers who were studying how humans make decisions. So there was this, President Nixon made this trip to China. And before it happened, these researchers asked people to make predictions about how they thought it was going to go. And then after the trip was over, the researchers went back and followed up with those same people to ask them how confident they were. Did their prediction come true? How confident did they feel in how likely their prediction was to come true? And what they found was that people were kind of misremembering. People were looking back and claiming to have had much more certainty than they actually did at the front end. And so that is where this term hindsight bias was born. You've also seen this if you've ever heard the phrase Monday morning quarterback. And so for those of you guys who don't know what that phrase means, this is the phenomenon where somebody watches a football game over the weekend, and then they go into work on Monday and they criticize the quarterback or the coach or the other players or somebody for what they did or didn't do, and completely neglecting the fact that at the time that the decision was made, nobody knew the outcome of the game. Not the quarterback, not the players, nobody. Nobody knew the outcome. So that's another example of how this kind of shows up in our everyday lives. And then the last example that I like to give is I remember learning about, the actual event is a little bit before my time, but there was a car called the Ford Pinto that became infamous because I think what was going on is whenever the car got rear-ended, the gas tank would catch fire and people died. And the guy that was in charge of recalls for Ford at the time became like public enemy number one because he could have saved lives and he didn't. There were two instances where the Pinto was up for recall, and he made the decision not to recall it. And so, of course, he became this monster. But when he made those decisions, the explosions hadn't happened yet. None of those bad outcomes had happened yet. And if you really go back and look at what did he really know at the time he made that decision, it actually looks like he made the best decision he could have given the information he had, and of course not having the ability to predict the future. So what does this have to do with trauma and PTSD? Well, it's the exact same phenomenon that can impact people who are trying to make sense of a traumatic event, understand why it happened, understand their role in it. So I think it's important to discuss something called the just world belief. And this is a belief that a lot of us get taught as children. Maybe we learn it in school, church, from our parents, society at large. But it's this idea that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So if you just do good things will happen to you. And also, if you just don't do bad things, then bad things will not happen to you. And a lot of us hold this belief on some level, even if we're not consciously aware of it. So you've got that belief, and then let's say that something bad happens to you. So now you're kind of in this dilemma where you have a belief that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and you know that something bad happened to you. What do you do with that? And there's lots of different ways people might go with that. But one way that people will go, if they don't wish to change that belief in any way, is to take the event and assimilate it into the belief. So in other words, you make it where you are bad. And that is why this bad thing happened to you. Again, maybe it was my fault. Maybe I should have known. I should have been able to predict it. If I had just zigged instead of zagged, then maybe it wouldn't have happened. And this is why people often blame themselves for bad things happening to them, even if it seems completely irrational. And even if you know it's irrational, a lot of people rationally know that it wasn't their fault. And emotionally, they still feel guilt or shame or self-blame. And part of the reason for this is that the alternative is scarier. So you can either believe that, oh, this bad thing happened to me because I did some bad thing, so I just won't do that bad thing in the future, and that'll prevent bad things from happening to me. It gives me control. Well, the alternative to that is that life is random and unpredictable, and you can do everything right and still have a bad outcome. And that's kind of scary. So a lot of people don't really want to believe that because it's understandably because it's scary. And that also is what keeps you stuck in self-blame, in shame, in guilt. And I think that's worse. So before I get into just a little bit of, how I like to talk to people about what to do with this, if you are enjoying this so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. I make a lot of content about this and my other areas of expertise. Okay, so how do you start to break this cycle? Well, you really want to think about what did you actually know at the time the event happened. Not what you know now, but what did you actually truly know? What did you know? What did you not know? What were you actually aware of at the time that you made whatever decision it was that you made? And you also want to think about what your intention was in whatever you did or didn't do. So you really want to think about in whatever it is you did or didn't do. Were you trying to bring about this bad outcome? Or were you trying to avoid it? Or were you trying to prevent it? And really thinking about what did I actually do? What did I actually know? And what was my intention? And sometimes what this comes back to, what this kind of comes down to, is that sometimes bad outcomes are just unforeseeable. And there wasn't anything you could have done. And you can do everything right and still have a bad outcome. And that's scary. But I would make the argument that it is ultimately better to try to learn to live with the uncertainty of, yes, bad things can happen, than living under the weight of things like guilt or shame or self-blame. So before I close this out, I'll also just mention that I have a monthly newsletter that I send out that has kind of similar to what kind of stuff I cover on here. So if you're interested in that, I'll have a link down below in the description. So kind of just some housekeeping stuff at the end. If this was interesting to you and you are located in the state of Texas, you might be a good candidate for something called cognitive processing therapy, or CPT. I do it, I'm trained in it, and it's an evidence-based treatment for PTSD. So if you're located in Texas and this sounds interesting to you, there's information in the description below for how to contact me. If you are not located in Texas and this sounds interesting to you, I'll also link a directory down below where you can find somebody that's licensed in your state. Therapists, at least in the United States, are licensed by our states. And so we can only provide care in states in which we are licensed. So that's why there's that geographic restriction. I'll also put a couple of blog posts. There's one about kind of outlining what to expect in doing CPT. And then I have a blog post that I wrote that kind of corresponds to this video. So I will link all of that down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. Bye.